Morning, everyone. Thanks for coming to the rescheduled office hours. I appreciate you guys changing your calendars. Um, Today is going to be kind of an informal talk about doing guidelines and workflows and creating your own manuals in your own institution for how you're going to be documenting your collection and putting things in the database. This does not necessarily need to be a 30-page in-depth manual of every single little thing. Just a nice just guideline in case somebody has a question and to really make sure that you're doing things in a consistent manner. Um, I snagged and copied a couple slides from one of my old um, conference presentations about cataloging, and don't worry about cataloging, like just go do it. Um, and this is a quote that I found from Collections Trust in the UK that I really like. And it just kind of breaks everything down to um, managing the information that gives your collections meaning, not as an end in itself, but to record and retrieve what is known about your objects. So this is along the lines of my initial PowerPoint, which was, it doesn't have to be perfect, just do it. You just want to get the tidbits in there of what you know. So you want to go in and give yourself some guidelines as to what kinds of things you need to know, want to know, make sure everybody's doing it in the same way, and kind of go from there. And I have found it very useful over the years to have guidelines and ways of entering data, and also find out from my predecessors at institutions that I've been at what they've been using for their guidelines and their manuals and things. Um, and for anybody that is just joining, I've got my other screen going over here. So if I look over here once in a while, I'm just trying to coordinate what's going where. So let me put this one up. My previous incarnation at my last museum had a massive, massive cataloging manual because that institution, we started a new database system when she got there. And one of her biggest things was being consistent. And as proven from our previous database at that institution that was there in the 90s, it was probably started in the 90s. There was not a lot of consistency with things, and there was no guidelines on how to do stuff. It was a very early version versus the advancements that we've gotten so far in this. And there were very blatant inconsistencies with that system. So she wanted to make sure that consistency is key, making sure that you're able to find things. You've probably all heard this a million times. One of the first things my old curator taught me there was if you had to search for something in that old database, you had to search for Mark Twain by TWAIN, but you also had to search it for TWIAN because people weren't paying attention when they added things. This is kind of it's hard to do that with this system because we do have that authority record for entities. So that's not something you have to worry about, but there's a few other things that you need to pay attention to with this. She wrote up a whole thing and basically mirrored it on like a how to use the system thing. So we have our manual for Connecticut collections that tells you how to do things like within the system, how to create things, how to designate things, how to create new records and that kind of thing. We don't get into in our manual for you guys, we don't get into the bits and pieces of how to enter the data as far as, capitalize, not capitalize, all of that stuff. More than happy to give you recommendations and think about best practices, but we usually leave that to each institution. So this is one of the reasons that it's good for each institution to kind of come up with their own guidelines for things. So for instance, this is the old manual for my old system at my old museum, and she started off just straight out with guidelines for things. This is guidelines for creating titles. How to add multiple titles, what to create a primary, what is the bottom line for titles. She has it as the most general title as possible, be primary. And this is where she kind of gets into the nitty gritty with the system too, which is really helpful. And incorrect titles do not want to perpetuate erroneous titles. If a title has come into common usage, people have to still be able to search by it, include the title, but mark it as obsolete or something, like little things like that to figure out. We have the ability in collective access to do that and add multiple titles, multiple alternate names and things like that, and a lot of notes that we can find. And this is when she gets into like the rules for entering titles and things that you want to think about when you're starting to put things in your database. So capitalize for this one. And these are kind of still rules that I follow, and it has worked out well. And looking at my previous manual at Fairfield, these are a lot of the things that the past curators and the past staff had done in their style guide of their manual. Capitalize important title words, but smaller words, articles, and prepositions, for example, can be left in lowercase. Keep titles brief when possible. Try to keep them to no more than 3 or 4 words. Things like that. For me, that gets tricky when it comes to photographs, because I tend to want to, and this is again just how I'm doing things at Fairfield based off my old system. When it comes to photographs, I like to give it a little bit of a description. So when you're looking down a list, you know what it is, whether that's your primary title or your alternate title. If I've got a picture of a man walking down the street with a rowboat after a flood, it'll be like man with rowboat on flooded beach street, something like that, which is a little bit longer rather than this of saying like side chair, armchair, bed covering, something like that. But it gives you more of an idea of what the thing is. That photograph aspect of it came off of the very old, one of the first initial statewide digitization projects, which was the forerunner of CTDA. It was Connecticut History Online. And everybody was encouraged to create a more slightly descriptive title and to try not to have the same title if possible, which does become tricky if you're looking at a photograph of the Bulkley Bridge being built. So you don't want to have, we didn't want to have 50 things saying Bulkley Bridge being built. So it changed a lot, just with little tweaks saying Bulkley Bridge view from the, construction view from west, Bulkley Bridge construction view from east, and just tweaked it a little bit. So that's kind of up to you guys in your own systems. There's, things like this, ascribed titles, no title physically in the object. And this is mostly talking about object things versus other things. General title to describe the object, man's coat, historical context, Revolutionary War uniform, coat, Tory, Prince of Wales. And these would be a primary title would be that man's coat, and then they would start putting in the regular ones. So, do not assign more than 1 or 2 for ordinary objects. I assign a ton of titles. You don't really have to stay that little. There's a lot of things about the system that are limitless. And a lot of the time, if it's going to confuse the matter, think about that. But things that give them more description and the more context of what something is, I think the better. And, things like this, titles, and this is specifically talking about costume in this section, things that reference gender and age, the standard will assume, and this is them noting, you're going to assume that the costume is an adult and the gender that is most associated with the costume. That's why in that institution now in Fairfield, all of my dresses will just say dress, and that is assuming adult woman. Then it changes if you've got a child's dress, we put down child's dress. So that gives the differentiation. If it's suit, you can kind of assume man's suit, but there's women's suits too. So suit, I'll be more apt to say man's or women's suit. Things like this, pants, coats, shoes, wallets, always need gender. These are just things to think about. You don't have to do it this way. This is just an example. I did not grab copies of my Fairfield old style sheet because it's very similar. Because even though the curator that wrote the manual at Fairfield had actually been at CHS at my last museum, which is where this is from, but she wasn't there at the same time. But basically, it very much follows the same thing. So it's kind of a thinking best practice institutionally that both of those came about. And thinking about things like pants, coats, shoes, wallets, they're saying always need a gender specified because they're not gender specific. Man's pants, woman's pants, man's shoes, woman's shoes, things like this. And for specific clothing items like this one, they're saying patents are always women's, don't add the gender title to. Clogs can be men's or women's, so add the gender to title. If they're genderless items, just keep them as they are. It almost feels like you're talking about language and whether something is feminine or masculine in a language, which is interesting. And if you don't want to keep that, subscription to it and just want to leave it very genderless, that's fine. It's up to you guys. I would just designate that in the in your manual, in your style guide, so that you can see what needs to be done if someone comes back years later and has the question. This comes down to stuff like portrait of somebody versus the name. So we had said do not include portrait in ascribed titles, just use the sitter's name. However, use the beginning of both the label copy and description to add the identified field as a portrait. So for instance, in the institution, you have, portrait of John Trumbull, more likely by John Trumbull, but you know what I mean? So you would just say John Trumbull. And then in the description, you can say, portrait of John Trumbull, seated in a chair. He holds a book in his left hand, etc., that kind of thing. So it just kind of gives everything a uniformity and ability to kind of go down a list of stuff and see what it looks like. And actually, let me check something. Actually, let me go over this for a second too. Let me go to a new share. This. In the lines of people and entities and kind of thing. And this is, again, my old manual. And they would go through how exactly to enter a new record in the database. So this is saying, refer to this chapter of the manual on how to do this. And this is more of the style guide. So in ours, this would be an entity, is any person, company, thing like that associated with a record, and talks about object-related constituents, acquisitions-related constituents, things like that. How to do the new record, because again, she mixed both things of how to do things and the format at the same time. If you're feeling really ambitious, pull apart some of the collective access manual. You can pull lines from that and put notes for your stuff too. Up to you guys. It's there for you to use. How to handle different things within the system, going down to where I had been. Oh, so individual and things like this actually are important when you're putting people's names in and to make a decision. I think we've talked before, goes down a little bit, individual, this system, and we have the ability to add as many alternate names as you want, but you want to come up with the basic idea of what you want to do. For your honorific, we have military ranks and ecclesiastical titles. Do not abbreviate. I have not done this in my system. We had a rule at the old place, do not use Mr. or Miss, only use Mrs. when we have no choice but to create a woman's constituent record. This is based on the fact that in that way of doing things, we only used women's maiden names. I know we've talked about this in past trainings. This is something for you guys to make a determination of what's most useful. I kind of started doing that in Fairfield when I was cleaning up records, and then said, you know what? I want the most commonly known name because I can put all their maiden names in and things. I want to use the most commonly recognized name when I'm putting stuff in. And I do use Miss in my things because I have a lot of I have a lot of single wealthy young ladies from my past donors at Fairfields that had given stuff to the museum who were very much known in the accession registers as Miss somebody or other. I have Miss Florence Frame. I have Miss Bessie Jennings. And I want that pulled out because my successors and other people using the system in Fairfields are going to be looking for that. They're not going to be looking for somebody else. They're going to be looking for that and not want to be thinking they're looking at somebody else's maiden name. Plus, in my town, I'm sure a lot of you guys have the same thing. You've got a lot of same names in your town between Jennings and Burrs and 33 million other people, and then people who duplicated names. Because I have in my town, I've got Eunice Denny Burr of in my town, Rev War fame, and was also married to Thaddeus Burr. But then she had a niece or something called Eunice Denny. So if I called Eunice Denny Burr by her maiden name of Eunice Denny, it would be very easy to confuse with the other one. I have different ways of dealing with that as well, but something to think about. So Eunice Denny Burr in my system is Eunice Denny Burr, which is her married name. I do have her maiden name as an alternate name, but it's something to think about when you're doing this. There's more bits and pieces in there. I think we have, oh yeah, here's the note about the women at the old museum. And I think they've changed that too. I was talking to somebody about it not that long ago, and I think they've changed that formatting and are updating their records. And I understand why to do it that way, but it's not always convenient for people doing research and things in your system. Because records for women create the constituent record for women using her maiden name, 3 versions of each of her married names to be entered as an alternate name. Only use a woman's married name to create her constituent record if we do not know her maiden name. Again, up to you guys. I like including the married name, but it's something to think about and consider in what works best for your institution. Like Jody at the state museums, with your ladies, especially like Prudence Crandall, I can imagine there's a lot of stuff with that going on with people that she knew and other people that she was working with. Yeah, so that's something to think about. Let me go to find it for a second. There we go. I'm gonna go to the sandbox for a second. That. Oops, I'm gonna move my window again. Sandbox. Okay. This is a generally very uncleaned up version of a lot of Fairfield records. I should add some more because we've done so much cleaning and all the training that some of my errors are not there anymore. We have 247 entities. And as you go through and can see this, I've got stuff that still needs to be cleaned up. And you can see like I had Mr. Clifford Banks and I've got Banks Clifford S. This is just stuff to be cleaned. And I had used the Mr. I generally don't use the Mr. I do the Mrs., like I said, especially if it's the man's name and I don't know her name yet. But let me go down, look at this. Oh, I have, so like Miss Mary Alice. Mary Alice is huge in my town. She's another one that's huge. So leaving her as Miss Mary Alice is frankly useful. Because if you're looking down this entity name display list, you're going to be looking for either Miss Mary Alice or Mary Alice. You're not going to be looking for something else. And like Eunice Denny Burr, you're going to be looking for Eunice Denny Burr. You're not going to be looking for Eunice. I can't remember her middle name, Denny. Let me see. A note for a lot of repetitive man's names, because again, a lot of my people like to keep using the same name over. See, there's this W. Eben Burr. There's so many W. Eben Burrs or Eben Burrs and things in our system. And what we've done a lot of the time too is, I don't think we did it in the cleanup version of this, but my previous librarian, for some of the duplicate names, put in the display name, their birth year, in parentheses, so that you can see, let me go to Fairfield. I don't know if I can find one easily, but that's a really good thing to have in your style sheet and your style guide at your system of how should I do this person? I have 13 this guy burrs. Let me see who I have. The full. Let's do a brief summary and see what we've got. And it should be actually pretty easy to pull out the last name. So you've got birth dates and life dates here, which is fine. But here I've got 2 Abraham Gould Jenningses. People, I swear, love to repeat names in my town. So we have the bio and all that stuff and the dates, which you can be able to, tell by, but when you're just looking down a list for somebody or doing a search and pulling up a list, it's much easier to know that, oh, no, I want the earlier Abraham Gould Jennings. I want the one that's born in 1781, not the one that's born in 1821. So we've done that as just a little style at Fairfield, just to kind of add. We don't put the full dates. You could. Doesn't matter if you do or not. Again, what's going to work best for you guys? Like Ada Hines Warner down here. We just have her dates. She's the only one. We've also got in this display, you can see some of the alternate names that we've used. So that's a regular alternate name, and she was Ada Louise Hines first. So that shows up in your other names, but way to put those in. Get carried away with the names because it actually is such an important thing to think about when getting ready for entering data. And I've even also done this as a good example too. If I've put in a maiden name, or if they're more well known by a maiden name and married 2 or 3 times, I'll put their husband's name as their married name in like parentheses. Something to think about for your style guide as well. So she's Alice Bulkley Burr. She was married to Lewis W. Burr. So, she started out as Alice Bulkley. So I've got her as Alice Bulkley Burr, Mrs. Lewis W. Burr. Some towns that don't have as much information or as many duplicative people, it's fine. Let me get back to this for a second, so I don't get too carried away and it becomes an entity thing. So when you're writing this up, and you're figuring out which way you want to go, think about things. We've talked about this with make a plan and be consistent. And this is a part of the guide, and I've kind of talked about it on the side of a lot of the past office hours and things, of like talking about all that other stuff and then going, you should write this down to make sure it's fine. This is where it is. Make a plan, be consistent, and then write it down. And write down levels of records that you're using. By the way, do as I say, not as I do, because I have yet to update our style guide at Fairfield. So it's something I need to get to. It's on my list. And talk about things about what basic information do you need for your record. Obviously you need an accession identification number. And that's also, if you don't have an accession number yet, come up with a format of how to give something an identifier until you get an accession number on it. A lot of the time I have a few things that ended up in exhibitions at Fairfield, and I don't have an accession number for it. And because exhibition scheduling moves really quick where we are, I don't have time to go track down what this thing is, when we got it, who gave it to us. I know it's there. I know who it's kind of related to, but I don't have a chance to go see if I have a number for it. And I will enter something in Fairfield like NN for no number. And then I put a underscore and put something descriptive of like strawberry needle cushion, something like that. And then I'll leave myself a note of this needs to be tracked. I think it belonged to Mary Alice. Look it up later. It's not like the technical accession number, but it's just an identifier so you can look quick and know what it is. And you can also at that point pull really quickly to say, how many no number things do I have? Title, the name of the object, that's to determine how you want to do it, like thinking through the costume records. Do you want it dress? We've also used very broad terms for furniture, armchair, side chair, If we have, say, an armchair that has a lovely needlework cushion seat covering on it, we don't put that in the initial main title. We put that as the armchair. And then maybe as a subtitle, we'll say armchair with original needlepoint seat covering. All of that obviously can go in the description. But for the sake of being able to find stuff in your listings and see it really easily, it's easier just to have everything together and kind of go from there. And these are other things, your basic description. Do you need that? And how do you want to format your description in your system? Do you want to give it basics of other things? Like think about that of even just a note on like portraits. I've got other notes about don't ascribe. I should do this other presentation again because it's actually got, I think it's got good information. Don't ascribe feelings and things to people, and you can put that in your style guide. Don't put happy, ecstatic woman with, upset, distraught toddler. No, you want a portrait of woman with a small child, toddler, something like that. You don't necessarily know that this is what's happening. You don't want to put in, impress feelings and things on them. You can say things like laughing is fine if they're obviously like head back laughing. You don't have to kind of think about that because no one's going to necessarily think to put, distraught toddler in for a search term or see what it is. And you'll see it once you get to the record. You can see the child who appears to be crying, maybe something like that. And even like there's another one that I had an example of when I was looking through this earlier of, I think I put like a piece of furniture and it had like ugly black painted chair. And like, you don't want to necessarily say it's an ugly black painted chair, but heavily repainted chair, black, heavy paint covering carvings, something like that. For this like date and location, this is again for your style sheet, for your guide of like what creates a basic record, what creates a skeleton record. So somebody's not like, well, I don't know if that's a split slap back chair or if that's a, slap back chair with side rail. You don't need to know that. Just put down basically what you see. And you don't have to go out of control with it. This is the other part of it too, is location. Think about in your system, and I'll talk about location a lot in all of the trainings, and put this in your style guide too, especially if you're thinking about the very basic records. Where is this thing? Hopefully, by the time you're starting to put stuff in the system, you've already kind of worked through your locations and figured out where your different places in the institution are. If you haven't, put that on your list to do, but you might want to make sure that when you're entering a record, one of your guidelines is to put location in. And as I put on here, enter something if you can, even if it's unknown. And I have stuff that I don't know where it is. I'm putting the records in because I'm trying to not consolidate's the wrong word. I'm trying to match up records with donors from my old accession register. I'm doing a lot of back work on that. So I know that this, gorgeous beaded dress exists. I've seen it, not entirely sure where it is right this second. So I can't put a location in, but I want to note that I don't know where it is right now. So I do have a place noted as unknown in my locations in Fairfield. And this is funny because I think I've said it before too. This is where my counterpart in Minnesota and I disagree, because she doesn't put anything in if she doesn't know where it is, which I am very happy for her that she can do that. But this is where I've got kind of fields like this, like my unknown fields. And I've got a difference between missing and unknown. So if I know that dress exists, I've seen it, I just don't know where it is right now, I'll put unknown, and I'll put a note in the location notes that says location unknown at time of entry. If I have more information, I'll put in, I don't know this, or, I've seen it probably before 2005, or something like that. If something's missing, that's only if it's literally, we know that it was stolen or missing. There's one of a set of dueling pistols that went missing years ago, and we have documentation for it and everything. This was the same at my old museum too. We knew that was gone. So we still want it in the system. We still want to keep track that it was there. It existed. We used to have it. Why don't we have it anymore? Because it's missing. It was stolen. As I was saying, that made me think of something else. Maybe it'll come back to me. Oh, notes in general. So this is actually something that I want to put in our style guide for Fairfield. I don't even know if it was in the style guide for my old museum. It might have been. But when you go to something that is, let's say that's kind of a weird example. I don't know if I'll find anything easily. When you're putting notes in, this is a really great thing to include in a style guide if you decide to do something like this, is how do you want your notes formatted? You could just put an endless list of like random notes. I feel like it's really useful to, I don't know if I'll be able to find them this way, to ascribe a type of note when you're putting it in the notes fields. Not 35, I might have one down here. Okay. Things like this. So when you get down to your notes, rather than just having like a whole bunch of just writing about stuff, you can see that date note. Oh, what am I saying? Date not noted on DX session worksheet. Okay, good to know. I know I have to go back and look at that. And even more so with this one for a bottle with wine. I have date note. So I know it's something to do with the date of the object. It is said in the object file, always good to cite your sources for stuff like that. Something else to denote in your style guide, like cite the source of information that you're putting in a note. Send the object file in the accession register that the wine was made in 1861. There's a question of the date since the bottles used for the homemade wine have labels from 1883 on them. So that's it's somewhere down the line, somebody might want to straighten that out. I don't have time to do it right now, but I'm recording the fact that there's something weird about this. So when we go to use it for an exhibition or something, we know it has to be looked up. And also what I have found useful is putting in, if it's a date note, it fits something I found, put my last name and put the date that I said that. So I've not looked at this record since 2016 probably. But that's when I found it. Someday I'll go back and be like, oh yeah, we know this is a known problem and a known issue with something. Signing it is really helpful. And we always said when you were signing it, if it's a very specific known thing, like I'm finding that date issue, I'm going to say that the collections manager noted this in the records. For something else that's a useful date note to have that is like a common knowledge or easily findable thing. I'm noting that Finette Edwards Benson was married in 1863, so these calling cards would have been after that. That's easy genealogy search. So I don't even necessarily need to sign that. We did that a lot with a previous curator that I had who was is a doctorate in prints and had great expertise in prints. And if she would make a note about some technique, something with the print, I wanted to know that she was the one that said it. Me saying it doesn't really mean anything. Her saying it makes a difference, like technique note, something like that could go in. I'm curious what other notes I have. I also will sometimes put a, oh yeah, like something like this, exactly. Should be examined and when located for more information. I don't know which chest with key this is. It's hard to find. Notes this is this. Just good information to have. And I know that this is specifically about the date. This also means if I'm going and looking for more information about this, that's not the date, I can skip over that now. It doesn't matter. We can look at something else. I was very happy to find at one point, after we had been doing that at my old museum for years, which was one of my previous interns had gone to volunteer at Fairfield for a little while, and I found a note from him exactly in the format that we always did it. And it had his last name and the date, and I was just like, oh, he was following the guidelines. This is fantastic. So it's, old guidelines that you've had at your museum that you don't necessarily agree with or don't want to go ahead and you can change them, but just note it, put it in your records so that you can know that, even put a note in and say, as of 2017, it was determined that the woman's name in an entity record should be her most commonly used name. And then you can go on with your descriptions and your ideals of that. Oh, quick note about the Mrs. thing and all that. If I do know something, and this is getting back into entities again, if I do know something about the woman and her husband and all that, I will also put her, even though it seems repetitive, if I have her married name as her main name, I'll go in and put it in alternate title again and designate it as married name, even though it's the same thing, because that will help with searches going forward. So you kind of have to think about that as you're going through. So if I want to search by all of the married women's names, how can I make that happen? Because we don't designate that in the main name category, but we do in that alternate name category. So if I wanted to, I could go in, build a search, pull up all of the married women's names and go from there. Why you'd want to do that, I don't know. But that's just kind of the thing you have to think about as you're going through style guides and things. And let me see. Trying to think of any other good. Sorry, I'm going to look at my other sheet over here to see if it pops up anything else that I want to note. Dates are not as big of a deal in this system as it would be in other things because the system normalizes the date for you. So you can put it in. You don't have to say that you must enter it as January 1, 1984, because however you enter it, the system will make it consistent, which is great. Oh, and things like gifts and accession dates and things. How are you formatting your credit line? We have and dates of what the accession number is, purchases from a dealer. So putting in, most commonly in best practices not to put in the credit line, bought from Joe Smith. You just usually put museum purchase. But that is something that is good to put into your style notes, because that way going forward, any new volunteers, new people will know that. They won't necessarily know that by looking at your old system or looking at what's in your system. You want to know how everybody needs to be able to do that. There's a bunch of like little things, and I'm trying to think of what else, the types of categories that you want to think about. How you want to construct your physical descriptions. What do contain the elements of an object record? Things like that. And you can call back to the manual. You can cite parts of the manual. You can copy it and put it in your thing. And even if you're only like, well, we haven't done a ton of work, I don't know how to get onto all this, start a Word document, put collective access database, data entry, titles. Everything must be capitalized. Don't abbreviate anything. Even start from there, and you can add to it as you go. Just to note for people going forward, you have a new volunteer starting, and you can say, okay, here's our style guideline, and you hand them a piece of paper that has 2 lines, but they'll be doing those 2 things the way that you want them in the system. And you can always tell them to, like, well, ask me what else you have questions about and how to do it, and we can add to that, or we can figure out how you want to proceed from there, and have them help you. Be like, what questions do you have? You said you didn't understand how we did such and such. Here it is. So here's a good example for my titles of, I have skirt, culottes, skirt, net sinker, gunflints, and then I have square dance costume. Okay. In theory, it should just say dress, But for something like this, the fact that it's a square dance costume is very important to be able to pull that out easily. Can I search for square dance costume and it'll come out in a alternate title? Sure. But looking at a list of stuff, oh, it'll jump out much easier. So that's an in-house determination again for you guys to make. You don't have to do it the exact way that my old museum. You don't have to do it the exact way my museum does. Whatever works out better for you. Oh, here's my pincushion with my no number strawberry. Pincushion, needle, emery. Really weird description in the identifier. Oh, and spelling pincushion wrong. This is when you think you don't make mistakes in your own system. You do. And then I have alternate title to be numbered. So I don't think I have a note. Oh, no, I just have a note of one of the exhibits that it was in. Someday I'll figure out what happens, where it came from. But until then, I know that it exists and I know that it was in that exhibit. So, I mean, that kind of covers all the basic things for that, I think. Let me look at this other thing. Yeah, that was about it. So does anybody have, I'm going to stop recording.